People who watch security cameras for a living, what creepy things have you tried to forget? I work in a retail store, and for a while I worked security here. Watching the security cameras wasn't technically my job, but we were consistently short-handed in that department and the manager was grooming me for promotion, so I got to fill in and watch the cameras occasionally. One day when we were reviewing footage from overnights, we saw this teenager calmly set down his shopping basket, take off his hat and glasses, and just charge at a wall, hit it head on. He did this 2 more times. When he was done, his face was a bloody mess, and he put his hat and glasses back on and just left. Weirded me right the heck out. Someone needs to explain this. Worked as a harbor master a while ago. Had to check the marina's cameras after a boat was abandoned at our docks. I was looking for the owner. I looked on the tape from the boat's first night in the marina. The man who had sailed the boat in was standing on the end of his boat for 2 hours, barely moving. Then at 1:30 AM he just walked off the back and dropped into the water. He never came back up. Never found his body. Freaky. If this were on an OLEP, it would be called I was a harbor master a while ago, and I saw something weird on the security cameras. Part 13. I used to do asset protection for a Walmart in a very heroin addicted area. The creepiest thing was seeing how fast someone would go from completely normal to absolutely out of it in the span of a year because of the drug. You could build a timeline of their demise through CCTV pictures and video. One man in particular really stood out to me. The first time I apprehended him he was very polite and intelligent, just stealing to get his fix. A year later and the 4th time I caught him he was basically a shell of a man. He tried running from me and I looked him right in the eyes and said, "I know you. Gary last name. Please don't run." The look on his face of someone knowing him who he couldn't even remember will always stay with me. I investigated internal loss for Target and one time, as I was walking a lady, who stole thousands of dollars worth of stuff, out in handcuffs with the police, she turned to me and said, "Thanks for being so nice to me. I will never forget that." Years ago I worked overnight at a homeless shelter for men. A good portion of the regular guys that stayed there had mental health and or drug problems. There were a lot of fights and the occasional stabbing, but for the most part everyone was relatively behaved and most were good people at heart. I received a lot of threats, but one ever acted on them. One night when I arrived for my shift I noticed there was a much larger police presence than usual. I walked into our office and the officer in charge started asking me if I had noticed a guy, Richard, behaving unusually at all lately. I had not saw anything out of the ordinary and I told them such. I looked at the dorm list and noted that he was marked as no longer staying at the shelter. He was a long-term resident, so I thought this was odd. The police left without telling me anything except the fact they needed security footage from 2 specific cameras from the night before. I did not work the night before and the guy I normally work with pulled a no-show. We were the only 2 people besides the manager, who was on a holiday, that were trained on how to burn footage to a DVD. I spent the rest of my shift in shock. When I found the footage they were looking for I felt physically ill. Richard had gone out onto the 2nd floor smoking deck, finished a cigarette, got up on the railing, and dove head first onto the cement below. The first camera on the 2nd floor showed him jump, but the second camera on the 1st floor was much more gruesome. He landed head first and rolled over in a way that he was staring right into the camera as he lay there dying. I quickly put the footage on DVD and went to throw up. I was given the next day off. No counseling. No nothing. I will never forget that one. He was a pretty good dude as far as I knew him. Some mental issues, but no one knew he was suicidal or why he did it. Working in a rehearsal studio for bands we had camera at the front desk that pointed down the hall with the entrances to all the rooms. One day I'm sitting there minding my own business and noticed there was a girl sitting in the hallway outside one of the studios. She had come in with the band that was practicing and I just assumed she didn't feel like sitting in the loud space with the band. So I got up and went to tell her she was welcome to sit in the lobby where there was a couch and TV. I got around the corner and she wasn't there. I went back the desk and there she was, sitting in the hall waiting outside the room. So I went back out to find her not there again. I assumed she had gone into the room, so I went and knocked and they informed me that the girl had left a while before, just after they had gotten started practicing. So I went back and there she was, still on the camera. It was only then that I realized I had accidentally bumped the freeze frame button for the monitor. That killer ending. I thought it was a bogus post until then. Not necessarily creepy, but I work on security for a popular UK supermarket and came into work one day to find a note asking me to burn an incident off the cameras onto disk. It was something from the car parky previous night, so I figured we'd had a shoplifter in or an accident in the car park. But no, it wasn't anything as pleasant as that. We'd had a situation where a couple, older white gentleman and youngish Asian female, had been in store and the night security guy just thought they were acting a bit funny. So he follows them round store on CCTV in store to see if anything went on. Nothing really happens during this time, though the guy seems to become more and more aggravated. They go outside having purchased their shopping to pack it into the car boot, when a clear argument occurs between them. He suddenly turns round, kicks the empty trolley across the car park and then smacks her full force in the face out of seemingly nowhere. She recoils in pain. A bit more shouting takes place but she seems to dutifully take her seat in the passenger's seat despite what just took place. During the process of burning this to disk for the police, since our security guy had called it in as an assault, I had to rewatch the moment where he hits her over and over again, but watch helplessly as she seems to calmly get into the car of the man who just assaulted her. Long story short, she was a mail order bride who was trafficked here and as well as assault he got done for people trafficking. So a pretty wholesome ending to an otherwise awful story. It's kind of fricked up that mail order brides have been like a standard punchline to sitcom jokes that I've heard since I was a kid and it never clicked for me until now that it was a form of human trafficking and a real thing. I always assumed it was either some kind of scam or a girlfriend in Canada kind of thing. I'm not in security but I work for a bank and part of my job is checking the cameras in the morning for pings overnight, and then making sure all the pings were just squirrels or leaves etc. Last week I saw a ping on our back entrance camera and when I went to watch the video, it was a guy I didn't recognize walking back and forth in front of the door at 3 AM for a solid 20 minutes. Like just pacing the whole time, and every couple minutes he'd stop and walk up to the door and stare into the camera. Then he'd go back to pacing. A car eventually went by and that must have set something in him off because he legit ran away and didn't come back. We ended up calling the cops about it but I still have no idea who he was or what his deal was. He was probably gonna try and rob it, but when he got there had an internal conflict. I've heard stories of that happening before. Was watching CCTV footage of a parking deck, and on the 9th level there's this guy sitting in the middle of the deck, banging his head on one of the pillars. All of a sudden the guy just stops and runs to the edge. Without stopping or jumping, he flings himself over the edge. I immediately called dispatch and told them what had happened. Few days later I was offered counseling for those events. I'm glad you were. A lad I grew up with worked security at a large shopping mall. Security get radioed to a jumper. He is first on scene. Blood everywhere. Body in a complete state. After emergency services left the scene, they washed down the bus access road and he was ordered back to work. He wasn't offered counseling or a day off to gather his thoughts. I hope you're doing better now. One time there was a spider on the lens. It was big. It stayed there for like 3 days. Was it big or just really close? Mostly lots of sex. I've had to turn on the microphone and tell them to stop it or they'll be thrown out of the college gym. I'd have just started narrating. So many of these will give me nightmares so I'll throw one in the mix that I never want to forget. A year back I was working at a hostel and we have security cameras throughout the building. Watching the footage from the camera in the kitchen. It is about 2 AM and a very drunk guest walks in, grabs some snacks, and accidentally drops an empty bottle on the ground. He then proceeds to kick it up into the air then kick it again in air, where it flies across the entire length of the room perfectly into the recycling bin. In his drunken state he threw up his hands, ran around in a circle clearly in shock at how amazing he is. Then after looking around he noticed there was no one there to see it. After that he looked visibly depressed and stumbled back out of the kitchen. I hope you went up to him the next day and said I saw what you did last night. Kid pooped in an aisle of Walmart and an old lady slipped in it. I used to do IT support for a company that had a lot of heavy machinery moving around inside a big warehouse type area. This giant front end loader would scoop up material and dump it into a hopper. Along the sides of the floor were these huge concrete barriers. I've heard them called Jersey barriers and mafia blocks, but they are about 10 feet tall, and this one guy's life was ended when the front end loader inadvertently scooped the base of the barrier and landed on one of two guys walking shoulder to shoulder through the plant. I was tasked to review the footage, then make copies, 6 of them, to be exact, and then ensure that the footage worked and was self-executable and able to be run from a USB stick. So I had to watch the footage of this guy get killed over a dozen times. I, too, was offered counseling for just watching the video. I used to work IT at a university, and last Easter we had a break-in. We found the footage of the guy going in at 2 PM, leaving at around 3, and not really taking anything. Fast forward to 7 PM and the guy comes back in and is walking around the auditorium till 6 AM the next morning. In that time he proceeded to strip into his underwear, steal and wear a mask the Japanese exchange students made for the teacher, and smoke a crap ton. He managed to steal 6 full bags of random items. We've dubbed him as a jack-off bandit. Missed your chance at calling him the hijacker. Not for a living, but I have had security cameras for the last 10 years at my house. A guy was shot 7 times in front of my house but I only caught the audio. I've had random people walk around the front of the house looking for anything to steal and actually stealing crap several times. Countless instances where people come up to break into my car until they realize the motion light kicks on and we have cameras. Most of the time people breaking into cars have a large tool bag over their shoulder. It's so amazing about the number of times people come up to my house doing weird crap. If I didn't have the cameras I wouldn't know about hardly any of this crap. One pro tip for anyone installing cameras: make sure you put lots of signs saying that there is video surveillance. Otherwise you just end up with a lot of footage of people stealing stuff. A guy was shot 7 times in front of my house but I only caught the audio. Jeez, you'd think he'd stop walking by your house after, like, the 3rd time. Saw a chicken walk up the side of a tree at 2 AM. I worked at a 24/7 gas station for a while. One night my co-worker accidentally killed himself while at work, and I made the mistake of watching the footage. He went to the back of the store with a bag of drugs, snorted it and started acting funny for about 10 minutes. He then sits in the back office and gets fidgety thrashing around until finally he just goes limp in the chair. He had died of a heart attack and sat there for 5 hours before anybody came in, thought the absence of an employee was strange, and called the cops. It was really weird seeing people come in and act all pissy for the lack of service. They'd just leave thinking someone was lazy, but nah, dude was dead. As someone who used to work at an all-night convenience store, I used to hang out in the back all the time, and there were definitely times I missed people on the cameras waiting for me to come sell them cigarettes. I always came out eventually, but still, it's understandable for folks to assume someone's just being lazy. You have been visited by the wealth rat. Subscribe in 12 seconds and he will share his wealth with you. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.